Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. Today it is just me today, and we're going to have a shorter episode. Or anytime I've ever said we're going to have a shorter episode, it generally goes to the expected amount, usually around an hour, 50 minutes or so. Today I think it is going to be a shorter episode, so you can hold me to that. So we've had an interesting week this week. Of course, I had an episode earlier this week. Me and Jake Lloyd didn't expect the Derek Chauvin guilty verdict to come out so quick, or the verdict itself. I think in our analysis, I was optimistic. I thought it was going to be a hung jury, and we were going to have a lot of chaos come from that. But it turned out we had a quick guilty verdict, and hasn't been really much happening. But I don't want to say that everything's going back to normal, because of course nothing is going back to normal. And many of the events that have happened since then indicate we are in new terrain, and what we saw last summer over George Floyd's death, probably we're going to have to happen again this summer. Some people may say those are Blackpills, but that's just saying how it is. But I think after this grim week we just had, everyone, most analysis is just going to be completely blackpilled. If you're looking at some of the tweets on Twitter, posts elsewhere on Telegram or Gab, people are pretty down on the dumps. I mean, for likely reason. I think what we saw with the Derek Chauvin verdict was a complete, diminish. It was a complete overthrow of our justice system that we had. The fact that 12 people could immediately see this guy is guilty of 3 different counts of homicide. He was convicted of, 2 murders and a manslaughter for the death of one person. And I don't know how that works, but that's our new justice system. I think there's a lot of reason. It's like there's no justice for white men. Everyone's going to say that, we all get what was the message of the verdict. So it's better to offer white pills. That's what I want to do with this episode, as not as like things to look forward to or things to know that a lot of things are going in a direction that we want the country to go in. And you may say, like, how can that be possible, Scott? Scott, how is that possible? Everything looks grim. It's time to give up. Never give up. There is always hope. And I'm here to deliver white pills. So the first thing I want to offer that's a white pill is that some people thought of this as a grim moment, a grim event to look at and showing how insane everything is. But actually, if you look at it with a clear pill direction, with a clear pilled mindset, you will see this is actual white pill. In Columbus, Ohio, it was just about the time that the Derek Chauvin jury was about to announce their verdict. A aspiring surgeon named Ma'Khia Bryant got into a knife fight with another black teenager, and when police showed up, she didn't stop fighting with the other teenager, and she pulled a knife and was ready to stab her rival. Well, the white police officer in this case heroically shot her before she could make a fatal stab. And in most cases, you would have seen, if this had happened, say, a few years before, maybe 5 or 6 years before, I don't think anyone would have even Black Lives Matter people would have been like, okay, this is clearly a justifiable homicide. Completely different change of circumstances here. You had prominent figures like Valerie Jarrett and others who defended knife fighting. I mean, even though Valerie Jarrett wasn't one of those who explicitly defended it, she did say about how horrible this is, and we demand justice for Ma'Khia Bryant. The White House demanded justice for Ma'Khia Bryant, and there was Bree Newsom, pretty powerful left-wing activist, who explicitly defended knife fighting, and so did others. Brittany Cooper, who goes by Professor Crunk, was also defending this, and they're all basically saying blacks just can't live out and be teenagers together. They can't just knife fight when they feel like it. This is how oppressed they are. I guess that's the new standard that's going on. And also LeBron James called out and demanded docs the officer, said, "You're next, accountability." And so did all their celebrities, calling, demanding justice, and demanding this officer's head. Now, you may say that this is so ridiculous, that these people are so insane that they can't even notice when it's an obviously justified police homicide. But I want to say that you want these people to have this reaction because you want to discredit these people in the eyes of these, squishy white suburbanites who still cling to norms and standards and thinks that like the other side are just reasonable people who just have mild disagreements, and we can all work together and pass bipartisan legislation on criminal justice reform or whatever. And they may even said that like, oh, what Derek Chauvin did was terrible, but I also oppose defunding the police. And these like enlightened centrists, and a lot of suburbanites are like this, and a lot of conservatives are also like this too. They always like to insist like, I like to have other friends on the other side, and the other side are Americans too. You want this insane reaction to disabuse these people of these ideas. You need this insanity to show the ordinary normie conservative that no, these people are not just mere Americans who you have disagreements with. They are your enemies. They have a completely warped sense of reality and a completely different set of values. And the things that you are disgusted by, such as allowing kids to knife fight as long as they're people of color and that the real criminal is the cop who prevented it, if you think that's insane, then you need to apply this to the other side. And I think we need more moments like this, of more moments of clear insanity from the left in order to move white America or middle America in the positive direction. Because otherwise, if they see Valerie Jarrett and the White House giving a reasonable response to these events, such as this week, the Daily Caller and other conservatives were praising Joe Biden for mildly condemning rioting and saying, please don't riot. And they're like, good on him. Thanks, Joe Biden. They will cling to any scrap of common sense and just say like, oh, look, the other side, we can reason with them. You want to show that you cannot reason with these people, that these people are your enemies and they're insane, evil, and you need like events like this to happen. So I actually think that the reaction is a white pill. This needs to shake people out of their complacency. They need to realize like how the situation we're in. And if it takes LeBron James going after police officers, heroic police officers, if I might add, and Valerie Jarrett and these other powerful people defending knife fighting, then so be it. One of the things we want to destroy is bipartisanship. As I've probably argued before in tweets and on podcasts, is bipartisanship. Pretty much any time it comes together, it's to fuck over the American people. Like if you look at Iraq War was an example of bipartisanship. Past amnesty bills were an example of bipartisanship. Criminal justice reform now is a bipartisanship. I mean, there was a time where there were some good things that could be the work of bipartisanship, such as the tough on crime bills in the 80s and 90s, but that's no longer the case. Anything that you can imagine that is bipartisan is terrible. And we need these events to show we need a radicalization of the other side in order to, push our side in a more radical fashion in the direction that we want, in a fashion that would actually defend the American people. And I think that and I think that this is a great weakness of a lot of these white suburbanites. If you talk to a lot of them, they will merely say, oh, I think Black Lives Matter just wants to ban chokeholds and have more police cameras, more body cameras, and they have very reasonable demands. And it's so awful how they murdered these innocent cancer researchers who are unarmed, and they seriously believe this. And you need to show them examples of just hey, this is what Black Lives Matter believes. That you see an armed person of color ready to stab another person, and Black Lives Matter says the police should not intervene in that situation. They should let that black person stab their victim. That's what they stand for. And you also need to show them these highlights of what Black Lives Matter activists say. I mean, there was a video that was I saw on Twitter where it was one of these lead organizers. I'm not sure what city they were from, but this person went on about how they defended looting, is that we should loot every store. We should steal everything possible. And we're right to do so because of what this nation has taken from us. So the nation owes us to give us carte blanche to loot. This is what Black Lives Matter stands for. And people need to disabuse of these notions that we're just all in the same country. We're all Americans. We all get along and we're all holding hands and we're just having some mild disagreements that can all be resolved through compromise and bipartisanship. No, they need to learn this lesson that is impossible, and that the only way is like being engaged in a metaphorical war. I don't want to say an actual war because that's not going to happen. I may get into that later. But they need to see this as a serious conflict, and the other side as enemies, not like people that they simply disagree with. And so this is like, that's the white pill of this. And I think, we talk about like a mental accelerationism, a consciousness accelerationism that happens from these events. Oftentimes they don't, but I do think the nature of the chaos that's swirling around in the Biden era and these events, they're going to get more insane. So I think, and this is a type of white pill, is that we're going to see riots, like severe violent riots, over a situation that's very similar to the Ma'Khia Bryant. You'll see they'll claim that like some 28-year-old black guy who was about to point his gun at a police officer was actually a 12-year-old pointing a BB gun, and he was just playing with friends, even though he's in the middle of a crime. And you'll see riots over that this summer. And I think we do need these incidences where it's very clear that the police and the conservative side is in the right, and the other side is completely, absolutely batshit insane. And I think you're going to see more of that, and I think that is going to lead to positive developments and towards the consciousness of middle America, where they're not going to fall for what happened with George Floyd. I mean, the thing what happened with George Floyd is that a lot of people just saw that clip, saw a guy gasping for air and pleading for his life, and they saw this like the cruelest thing ever. Now what we see with the facts that came out, it's like, well, that's not, the guy was having a drug overdose, and even though whatever the courts may say, his knee was not on, his knee was likely not the primary cause of death. So, these things are going to take place, and I think you're going to move it in a more positive direction. And I think is the one white pill we said before, is that the truth is now able to come out. I think the mainstream media would have hid the body cam footage before, and we would have, allowed this story to percolate and fully sink into people's minds that this was just some innocent black girl playing on the street who was murdered. And then it was quickly disabused of that due to the way that information can now be shared through social media. The big tech and mainstream media want to have their suppression, but even with all their efforts, the truth can still come out. The main problem, and I know I'm trying to say white pill, the main problem is that a lot of Americans are so browbeaten with propaganda and so indoctrinated that it doesn't matter if they are come in contact with the truth, as we saw in the Derek Chauvin trial. So that's the first white pill, and not necessarily a obvious white pill, you would say. And this goes the same for the second white pill. As the liberal elite discredit themselves in the eyes of the domestic public, they're also discrediting themselves on the world stage. I think you can see this with the example of what's going on with Nord Stream 2. Some of our listeners may be wondering, what the hell is Nord Stream 2? Well, it's a gas pipeline that Russia is building through the Baltic Sea to connect it to Germany. Both Germany and Russia approve of this and are very supportive. It'll benefit their economy. But the people who do not like it is the United States. We really do not like this idea because we think that it's going to give Russia more clout in the EU, as well as cut America out of what Europe is doing, which we really do not like that idea. The whole point of the Cold War was to combat Soviet influence in Europe, and now we may see Russia take a greater influence over Europe, and Europe decide to cut us off and prefer Russia as their strategic partner, or at least their economic partner. Both conservatives and liberals want to impose sanctions on Germany and Russia in response to this. Even though it doesn't appear that it's going to work. The pipeline is 95% complete, and it should be finished in really quick, possibly even within a month. So there's not much that they can do, but they even want to sanction German companies and German affiliates, which is a pretty big deal. That they would, take those type of economic measures against what is an allied nation and some of their biggest companies. I mean, we've of course sanctioned Russia time and time again to no avail. So this is another example of the stupid bipartisanship that we have, where we'll just say, "Oh, great! Like we're all coming together to fight against Russia," which Russia is not our problem. As I had a tweet this week, is like, imagine being a conservative and caring about China, Iran, and Russia. The real enemy is here, and it's embedded within the globalist American empire. So what's bad for the globalist American empire is good for the American people. And what's good for the globalist American empire is bad for the American people. So Nord Stream 2 getting shut down ensures that this globalist appendage that is attached to our people and unfortunately is oppressing us is allowed to have greater sway in Europe and all across the world. We don't want that. We want Europe to separate itself from us, from our nation, so that we can heal ourselves and reform within our own country. Because the less power the globalist American empire has worldwide, the less power it's able to exert here. Or at least that's in my opinion. But I think that is the case. If you're discrediting these people who demand that we have to do things to set a good example for the world. It's like in the case, as I've said before, is like in the Cold War, is that we engineered these radical social changes in order to compete from a propaganda perspective with the Soviet Union. We enforced integration. We allowed, we banned school prayer and all these other social changes in order to show that we're a more egalitarian nation than the Soviet Union. And look where it got us. So the more we retreat from the world, the better it is for us. And this is a very important thing that's happening. And as we're seeing from Nord Stream 2, we are retreating, or we're getting pushed back, and there's nothing we can do. And that is a good example, is that we're not able to exert ourselves and make ourselves, the rest of the world worse due to the rest of the nation, or the rest of the world rather, not taking us seriously. And the Biden administration is doing a good job of making sure the rest of the world doesn't take us seriously. There was the example of Chinese officials totally pwning Anthony Blinken and his wacky staff when they showed up and tried to lecture them about the Uyghurs. They just said, "Your guys are racist," and Blinken just had no idea what to say. Even Ukraine can't depend on us. We pulled back our ships that were supposed to go in the Black Sea. We're pulling back from Afghanistan, which is a good thing. That's probably actually better for us on the world stage, but we're showing a ton of weakness and we cannot back up our threats. And I think this is one of the good things that Trump did, is that Europe decided that we can't trust America anymore. If they're going to elect someone like Donald Trump, we're going to go on our own path. And that is good, not just for Europe, but for us as well, because we need to dismantle this globalist empire and this dependence on policing the world and caring about things that happen in Ukraine or Afghanistan or Ethiopia or wherever. We need to worry about what's going on here. And I think the one unfortunate thing is that conservatives are not yet disabused of this notion. They still think that the Chi-Coms are bad, that we should care about Iran, and even worse, that we should care about Russia. But even with the Biden administration, they're planning on lifting sanctions against Iran and letting them develop, which is another good sign because that shows that, we're retreating from the Middle East. I don't know where the Biden administration wants to direct us to. I have a feeling they want to get us more involved in Africa, where both China and Russia are investing a lot in and are putting a lot of resources there, and definitely pivoting towards China or the Asian theater. So I think that's where we want to pivot, but it's not going to work. And I think we really need to not see as our national interests is served by what's happening with, our global economic interests, because they're in conflict. And our ability to free ourselves from this evil empire that we live under, we must hope for it to weaken and to be embarrassed, and to have these humiliations of Germany and Russia just saying, "We don't care about your sanctions. We're going to build this pipeline and we're going to cut you guys off from, having influence over Europe." The less influence we have over Europe, the better it is for Europe and the better it is for us. And so that is a white pill that the Nord Stream 2 is getting built. And I do think it is a sign of how wacky our empire is. I do want to mention that Blinken recently said that, essentially ordered all embassies throughout the world to raise the gay pride flag everywhere, which further shows how ridiculous we are, and that no one in the Middle East and no other country where they have and respect traditional values is going to take us seriously. And even in Eastern Europe, where they're having a lot of them are dependent on American aid and American support, such as Poland and the Baltics countries. They're going to bend to see is like, what the hell is this? Like, is it the price of American subservience worth being embarrassed by listening to these people? And hopefully seeing more examples of that will make them, not want to listen to the globalist American empire. And that is, once again, as I want to repeat, that is good for us and good for them. Now, the third white pill I want to do is an actual genuine white pill. It's not, looking at bad things that are happening. It's actually finding the other side and how they're actually good, and things that are, you would have thought are bad are actually good. Like, this is good. Anyone can tell this. And I want to say is that the political direction of the American right is going in our area. It is becoming woke. It is becoming more America first. Yes, there are some hurdles and obstacles that are happening. I mean, as we saw with the America First caucus that emerged last week, and it was quickly shut down. As I said, argued with and discussed is a better word than argued with Jake Lloyd in my last episode. It's not necessarily the end of the world, and I think that what you're seeing with the House Freedom Caucus and the Republican Study Committee, which the Republican Study Committee was always seen as the more cuckier and more milquetoast version of the House Freedom Caucus, they are both saying what we were saying, 4 or 5 years ago, and no one else was saying this, but now this is the mainstream of the right. I repeat this point ad nauseum, but Tucker Carlson is the #1 cable news host, and what he says on a nightly basis is things that would have been relegated to 4chan and dissident right websites just a few years ago. And even if you're looking at what the congressmen are saying, is that like 2 different congressmen or members of Congress last week talked about demographic change and how Democrats are using it to ensure a permanent electoral majority. That would have been unthinkable for any Republican to have said that in 2016 or 2015, with the exception of Donald Trump. But even Donald Trump didn't necessarily articulate that position explicitly. Implicitly, he was saying it, but explicitly he was not. And there's also, I want to point out that, people are saying like, oh, there's not really America First caucus. There's no one calling the dangers of mass immigration and standing up for traditional American values. Well, oddly enough, the new chair of the Republican Study Committee, Indiana Representative Jim Banks, issued a few memos that sound awfully like the America First caucus. In a memo he issued to all 150 or so members of the Republican Study Committee and to, I think, the entire GOP caucus itself, Jim Banks called for the party to cement itself as a working class party. Now, I've been feeling that some of this talk about the GOP becoming a working class party is kind of cringe, because it doesn't necessarily, it's ultimately empty boasting and posturing, and it ultimately is about ignoring the cultural and identity issues associated with Trumpism and just focusing on economic nationalism. But that's not the case here. On pretty much every issue that we care about, from immigration, trade, tech censorship, foreign policy, he is on the mark about what the GOP needs to do. On immigration, he supports reducing legal immigration, not just illegal immigration, but legal immigration, which is a huge change for the GOP. I mean, no Republican was talking about reducing legal immigration in the pre-Trump era. Now it's the mainstream. Now it's one of the most powerful people in the Republican House is arguing for this position. He's calling for anti-wokeness. He's calling for, trade protectionism. He's calling for, a pullback from these endless wars. And this is what we're looking for. And it's all about building up a party that supports middle Americans that, will call them working class. But it's much better than what the alternative message that is put forth by people like Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, and Tim Scott, which is like, we're just the party of opportunity for everyone. Like, no one is appealing to that. If I had to pick between saying we're the working class party or the workers' party versus the party of opportunity, I would pick the Workers' Party message any day. So this is a largely good message that he was putting forth. I actually do need to correct one minor thing about the memo, is that he didn't actually, as I think I listed a foreign policy in the memo, but foreign policy is actually not mentioned, but trade and everything else, and also this war on woke capitalism and wokeness are fully in there. The Republican Party is getting there on foreign policy, but not just that. So I just wanted to make that clear in case anyone called out my inaccuracies in this podcast. But Jim Bakes did issue another memo on April 12th that was even further hit and sounded our message. And this was about immigration. He hit the Obama administration for essentially arguing for open borders. He said, this is, quote, "The Biden immigration agenda sacrifices the interests of the American people in order to serve the interests of foreign citizens, criminal cartels, and ultra-wealthy multinational corporations." I don't think you could have seen anything better than that. You would have seen that type of message on VDare or other places, something that John Derbyshire would have said, many years ago. This wouldn't have been said by any top Republicans in the party. And he even offered 4 ways for the Republican Party to win over the American public to their side on immigration. And I think the list of ways he said is really good. He said the first step is national security. Immigration should protect our national security. Obvious. America first. Immigration policy should prioritize Americans first. Obvious. Rule of law. Immigration policy upholds the rule of law. And patriotic assimilation. I mean, this is a little cringe, but he says that we should try to assimilate legal immigrants, but that's much better than supporting multiculturalism and diversity. So I think if you look at a lot of the things that are happening with the GOP, with these statements, it is moving in our direction. And this is not just to say about the House Freedom Caucus. The House Freedom Caucus continues to hammer home about immigration, and they also don't care about racism accusations that are floated against them or any of these extremist accusations that are lobbed at Republicans. They're not all crawling on their hands and knees to apologize to the left for this. So there are some developments going on within the party that shows that they're going in an America First direction, even if they shut down the America First caucus, which I want to say is that if you have powerful caucuses like the Republican Study Committee and the House Freedom Caucus, essentially having that message, but having the power to do something about it, it's not too much to, really worry that they don't have an explicit America First caucus. As long as you have these organizations pushing for our agenda and, fighting against open borders and other things that we hate, then I would say that's a good thing, and that's something to be optimistic about. A lot of these changes are happening due to Trump and Tucker. I mean, where these people, new congressmen and even older congressmen are where they're wanting to get their ideas, they turn on Tucker Carlson. I think both Ron Johnson and Scott Perry, both who talked about demographic change last week, they were saying, they were probably repeating what they heard on Tucker Carlson. So Tucker Carlson is red-pilling these ordinary members of Congress. And a lot of the people who are going to be running in 2022, whether they're new members or they're trying to retain their seat, they're going to be echoing this message. And you can see this even with people who are considering a run for the Senate. If you're looking at Ohio, even though, yes, I know that there's many cringe aspects of J.D. Vance, and yes, we shouldn't elevate him to our messiah or a leader. The fact that what he's tweeting out, he is, talking about demographic change. He is talking about, ending the the endless wars, and an America First foreign policy, America First trade policy. I think the problem is he's not necessarily the ideal messenger for that, but he is pushing forward an America First agenda that he hears on Tucker Carlson. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily any differences between him and Tucker Carlson on policy-wise. The difference is just style and tone. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And yes, I know about the problems of J.D. Vance. I've pointed them out on Twitter and I've pointed them out in the show. And I do think there is a problem with trying to think that nice guy Trumpism can replace Trumpism. But I don't, as long as he's not attempting to do that and he's just trying to be a good senator. I mean, he could be somebody who's like a Rand Paul. Like I think we should like Rand Paul, even though he doesn't. He has a lot of cringe views and cringe votes. He's still a good member of the Senate, and I think J.D. Vance would be as well. Far better than the other 3 or 4 people he's running against. And you're even seeing this in, like, Alabama is a great example. Mo Brooks, who is an undeniable America First candidate, America First lawmaker. He is going to be the next senator of Alabama, barring some unforeseen circumstances, because he got endorsed by Trump, and that scared off most of the competition. He's got Trump support. He's got a high name recognition in the state. He's got a lot of backing, and it's a deep red state. He doesn't have to worry about a Democratic challenger. So barring some unforeseen circumstance that there's some huge personality who gets involved in the Alabama Senate race and can overcome a Trump endorsement, he's going to be the next senator. And Mo Brooks being a senator, he will be, once he enters, that's the upper chamber, the best senator there is, somebody we can count on to fight for us on pretty much every issue you can imagine. He's incredible on immigration. He's always called out the war on whites and explicitly said that. He fought the election, fraud and was stood by Trump 100% in that. So he's now going to enter the Senate. That's something to be optimistic about. And likely you're going to have an America First person in Missouri. Mark McCloskey, the guy who defended his home from Black Lives Matter marauders with an AR-15. He's out there considering a run for the Senate. And even with Eric Greitens, who is a kind of a suspicious character. He left. He had to step down as Missouri governor due to a sex scandal. Do a very hilarious sex scandal, which I'll probably discuss in a later episode. But it's probably not necessarily a white pill. But I think if anyone who's going to win the Missouri Senate race and fill that open seat is going to be an America First person. So I think these things are moving in our direction. And also, I keep, wanting to push that, is that like Ron DeSantis is like the most popular Republican right now. And he's governing pretty much how we would want an America First governor to rule his state or to, run his state. And there's very little we can complain about him. And he is the most popular Republican right now. And, I don't think if it came down to him versus Trump, obvious, as I've said in podcasts before, I would have go with Trump just for the chaos. But and it upsets the system more than Ron DeSantis. But Ron DeSantis is the next best thing to Trump, and he is doing a great job. And even in like people that I've had complaints with in the past, like Josh Hawley, Tom Cotton, are saying the right things and doing a lot of good things. Like Josh Hawley was the only senator to vote against this stupid COVID-19 hate crime bill that basically makes it illegal to call it to refer to COVID-19 by anything that may denote it as coming from China. And he voted against it and said that this is giving power to liberal bureaucrats to, overthrow the Constitution and overthrow our basic rights, which is true. So you do have Republicans who are willing to make stands that were bold and brave and courageous, and they wouldn't have done 4 or 5 years ago. So I think the political situation within the GOP and the American right is very optimistic. More and more people are saying what we're saying. And I actually, even on the final note, I think what the most positive thing would be this message that was sent by Charlie Kirk. I'm going to have to pull this up. But completely signaling that the Groypers won the Groyper War against him. So this is a very good tweet, and I couldn't believe that Charlie Kirk tweeted it, but here's what he said. Quote, "The modern cultural warfare the left is engaged in right now has done more damage to America in 4 years than the conservative boogeyman of socialism has ever done in the lifetime of our nation. Time to rethink our priorities and calculate a proportional response." This is coming from the guy who trademarked "socialism sucks" and sold these shirts to his youthful cohorts. And now he even realizes that this is stupid and we need to change our way of thinking and change the way we're going to handle the left in the coming years. So the entire right is moving in our direction. I think the real problems is the battle over what personalities are going to lead it, who's excluded, who's not excluded. what institutions we're going to rally around, how much power we can gain, what can we do with the power that we have. Those are the questions that we have. But I think, the bright side is the right is moving in our direction. These people are saying things that we were the only ones saying 4 or 5 years ago, and people who would have been cringe libertarians or neocons just a few years ago are now basically sounding like me. Or Nick Fuentes, or Darren Beatty, or many of these other people. And I think that's a positive development, and I think this is the necessary thing that has to happen in order for us to save our nation and save our people. So I'm very optimistic on the way the political winds are heading. And even though there are setbacks, and like Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell are still the nominal heads of their, the House and the Senate GOPs, the party is moving in our direction, and so is the rest of the conservative movement. I think we just need to start shoving people out of the way and making sure that certain usurpers are not the ones seen as the real America First. But those are negativity. I only want to focus on white pills. So I hope that people saw these as signs of hope. And the last thing I want to actually point out is that it's not just in America where this is the winds are going in our favor. Is that it is also happening in Europe. Marine Le Pen is considered a likely president next year in France. And this would be an incredible move if a nationalist becomes president of France. It's not likely, but it's far more likely than it was in 2017. She is running neck and neck with Macron. And even Macron is moving in a right-wing direction with how he's governing. And he's certainly far more right-wing than a lot of Republicans we have in America. So that's something else. And there's several other countries in Europe. Denmark is imposing incredibly based immigration policy and forcing really stringent assimilation policies that no immigrant can possibly follow, and kicking out immigrants, etc. Italy, once again, a right-wing coalition may come to power the next time there are elections. It's actually very likely that a right-wing coalition could come to power. And so there's a lot of good things going on within the political sphere, and I think our ideas are far more relevant than at any point in recent history. And there are certainly many challenges that are going on. There's many chaos, and there's lots of insanity that we have to witness on a daily basis that tests our mental fortitude. But know this: this system cannot last forever. Its contradictions are going to appear and are going to conflict, and it's going to make it topple. And we will win in the end. But you have to keep a positive attitude, an optimistic attitude, and know this, that we're going to have a lot of horrible shit happen in the short term, but in the long term, we will win. It's just a matter of organizing and waking people up. And I don't think the system cannot last forever. All the horrible things that you think are going to happen, and terrible things that may occur. Yes, there's going to be many more challenges in the future. Could be things that we could have never imagined happening that will happen. But know this, it's all a part of the plan. I was about to say plan. I won't go to say the plan. But it's all part of the process of eventually winning. And nobody has won anything great or really something that you want to achieve without a great fight beforehand, without severe challenges placed in front of us. And so these things are just going to be there. I do want to, one of the things I really want to get us white-pilled on is I read a recent book about the civil rights movement. And I think the more we study the civil rights movement, I know how clearly I clearly they did a lot of terrible things to this country. But I think that, they suffered many of the same similar challenges, and sometimes worse challenges, and yet they won. I mean, they remade America in its own image, and we have to do the same. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard, and there are going to be many things that we're going to lose faith and hope in, and make us just want to, live in a cave and under a rock and escape from the world. But escape is not an option. Only victory is, and that's the final message I want to leave you on this podcast. So I will be back next week. I'm not sure when I will record. We'll aim for Wednesday. We'll see what news breaks. I mean, there's just so much news that's going on now. So we will be back next week. It'll probably be me, but we could have a guest. I'll keep you posted. But until next time, stay respected.